Ray Crone was known throughout Arizona as the Snaggletooth Killer. An unusual bite mark on a murdered woman resulted in his conviction and death sentence. A forensic expert told the jury that he was 100% certain that it was Crone who bit the victim.
He knew he was wrong, but he had already committed, and his comment to me was, "I'm in too deep."
The CBS Lounge is one of many neighborhood bars in downtown Phoenix, Arizona. Hank Arredondo owned the CBS Lounge. Kim Ancona managed it for him.
In the bar business, you have to have a nice personality. You have to be honest. And all those qualities Kim had.
On December 29, 1991, Kim closed the bar at the usual time, shortly after 1 a.m. As was his custom, Hank called to make sure there hadn't been any problems.
Kim answered. I asked her, I said, "Is everything okay? Do you have any problems?" And she said, "No." She said, "Hank, I know you're tired. Go to sleep, rest. I'll take care of it."
When Hank arrived the next day to open up, he noticed the door was ajar.
I know my bartender didn't leave the door open. I know I didn't, so something's wrong.
He first checked the safe, but none of the bar's money was missing. He went to the kitchen. No one was there. Then he checked the men's room.
I can close my eyes and still see that scene. I saw her laying in the bathroom, her eyes fixed, dead. I can still remember that to this day. I probably will the rest of my life. But the girl was beautiful even in death.
The evidence suggests the killer grabbed a knife from the kitchen, forced Kim into the men's room, and stabbed her to death. He placed the knife in a trash can under the liner. On his way out, he left a shoe print on the freshly cleaned kitchen floor. Forensic experts identified the print as a Converse brand sneaker, size 9½. Hairs were found on Kim Ancona's body. They were black and not hers. It appeared that the killer had bitten through Kim's tank top, leaving a bite impression on her skin. 2 drinks were sitting on the bar, apparently poured after closing time. Forensic scientists found Kim's fingerprints on one glass. The other had prints not clear enough for identification.
The working theory then became she must have known who the person was. It allowed them into the bar against company policy, but nonetheless, and thereafter was killed by that person.
Robbery didn't appear to be the motive. There was no money missing from Kim's purse, but inside her purse, police found an address book with the name and telephone number of one of the bar's regular customers, a postman named Ray Crone.
He was not well liked. You know, he was just uppity or something. There was something different about him that didn't sit well with people.
Some of the bar's employees told police that Kim had expressed a romantic interest in Crone. If the bite mark, the shoe impression, and the hairs could be tied to him, police were sure they had their killer. During Kim Ancona's autopsy, forensic photographers took numerous photographs of the bite wound on her upper chest. The photograph showed the killer had a distinctive bite pattern. His left front tooth pointed outward beyond the line of his other front teeth. Kim's address book contained the name and telephone number of a man named Ray Crone, someone she had often spoken with at the bar.
Kim Ancona had told several friends that she was interested in Ray, that she liked him, you know, that she thought maybe something could happen. And those friends in turn relayed that to detectives.
Ray Crone was 35 years old, an Air Force veteran with no prior criminal record. Several bar employees told police that Kim had a date with Crone planned for the night of her murder.
When police talked to Kim's friends, the last person that they expected Kim Ancona to meet that night was Ray Crone. He was supposed to meet her to help close up the bar.
When questioned, Ray Crone said the two were just acquaintances. He denied there was any romantic relationship.
She was always a nice, congenial person and very friendly and outgoing. And I liked her personality. I liked, her bubbliness and things like that. There wasn't a relationship.
And Crone denied that he had plans to meet Kim at the bar, as her friends claimed. He also had an alibi. He shared a house with a co-worker who said Crone was home the night of the murder. But as police questioned Crone, they noticed that his left front tooth protruded slightly in a way that looked similar to the bite wound found on Kim's chest.
After looking at the bite marks on Kim Ancona's body, detectives pretty readily jumped to the conclusion that his teeth matched Kim Ancona, the bite marks found on her body.
Crone willingly agreed to provide an impression of his teeth by biting into a piece of styrofoam, which is commonly used since it's soft but still stable. Forensic odontologists examined a series of bite impressions from men who knew Kim Ancona. They found only one in which the left front tooth was clearly extended, just like the bite mark on the body. It was Ray Crone's.
I hear, brakes squealing, doors slamming. I look over and here's a police van unloading with officers, all armed, guns pointing at me, telling me to freeze. I was thrown on the ground, handcuffed, and taken off, and I was charged with murder, kidnapping, and sexual assault. That was the day of my arrest, New Year's Eve of 1991.
Crone maintained he was innocent, but he had no explanation for why his bite impression looked like the wound on Kim Ancona.
It was a very frustrating, aggravating, belittling situation to where you're just saying, why? Why? Why won't somebody listen? Why won't somebody take a minute and look at this intelligently, responsibly? You're going to see that there is a definite problem here.
But the bite wound wasn't the only evidence against Crone. The perpetrator left his saliva on Kim's clothing. DNA tests of that saliva sample were inconclusive, but tests revealed the perpetrator had type O blood, the same blood type as Ray Crone. He was arrested and charged with murder. At his trial, prosecutors believed the bite impression evidence was the most convincing.
They hired a nationally known bite mark expert from Las Vegas, Nevada to testify that it was a 100% perfect match, better than a fingerprint.
That expert was Dr. Raymond Rawson, a forensic odontologist and also a senator in the Nevada State Legislature. At the trial, Dr. Rawson used this video in which photographs of the bite wound from Kim Ancona's body were superimposed on Ray Crone's bite impressions. Based on that evidence, Ray Crone was convicted of first-degree murder and was sentenced to death.
I didn't care if I was going to be in prison for something I didn't do. You might as well kill me. I mean, what was life? My whole life, everything I worked for, everything I stood for, 35-year-old man was gone.
The press called Crone the Snaggletooth Killer.
That judge believed the bite marks were a form of torture, and because of that, he sentenced him to death.
But if Crone was innocent, as he claimed, how could a nationally known forensic odontologist be wrong? Ray Crone had spent 3 years on death row for the murder of 35-year-old bar manager Kim Ancona. During that time, he formed his own opinions about the bite impression evidence used to convict him.
I mean, you basically could take a sharp object, stick it in skin a couple places, and have somebody say, oh yeah, that's a bite mark, and it matches him. And you could get, if you showed it to enough people, you'd have, somebody saying that, yeah, it's a match. That's junk.
All death penalty cases in Arizona are automatically appealed to the state Supreme Court. And fortunately for Crone, this bite mark videotape made by the prosecution provided grounds for an appeal. the court ruled that the defense team wasn't given enough time to review the tape before the trial. For Crone's retrial, his family asked Chris Plourde to represent him. Plourde specializes in difficult forensic cases.
I heard the story, that Ray Crone's on death row as a result of a bite mark. I didn't know whether other evidence supported his conviction or not. I was originally kind of skeptical because I hear these stories all the time.
Forensic experts hired by Plourde discovered that the hairs found on Kim's body were Mongoloid hairs, meaning they were from someone of Asian or Native American descent. They also discovered that Ray Crone wore size 10.5 shoes. The shoe impression found on the kitchen floor of the bar was a size 9.5. The defense brought in Dr. Skip Sperber, a past president of the American Academy of Forensic Odontologists, to look at the bite wound evidence that more than anything else convicted Crone in his first trial. What Dr. Sperber told them came as a shock. He said he'd seen this evidence before. It had been sent to him before the first trial.
A good friend of mine, John Piakis in Phoenix, Arizona, called me and he asked me to look at this particular case, the People versus Crone. When I first viewed that case, thought there were too many inconsistencies for that to be a positive comparison between the teeth of Ray Crone, the suspect, and the victim's wounds.
Dr. Sperber told his colleague working for the Arizona prosecutors that this evidence was exceptionally weak.
We say on a range of 1 to 10, with 10 being very good, I would have rated this around 3 or 4, on the low side.
Here is a bite mark considered on the high end of the scale, a 9 or a 10. All of the teeth have made clear marks, and the relationships between the teeth can easily be seen. The bite wound on Kim Ancona had very few distinct markings. Dr. Sperber took the cast of Ray Crone's teeth and, using a low-tech but time-tested method, made a styrofoam impression and then traced the teeth patterns onto a transparency. He then placed the transparency over the top of the photo of the bite mark on Kim Ancona's body. Although the left front tooth in both marks was jutting forward, Ray Crone does not have any separation between his front teeth. The bite mark on the victim's body shows an obvious separation between those teeth. For Dr. Sperber, the results were clear.
If it's a good bite, it will really jump out at you and you will see immediately similarities. In the Crone case, there were no similarities.
So this was the key evidence, and to get the initial report back that a bite mark expert said it's not me, was like, oh wow, something good can happen.
In the second trial, Dr. Raymond Rawson, the same bite mark expert from the first trial, repeated his testimony. He said there was no doubt the bite mark was from Ray Crone. A team of defense experts disagreed.
I could positively exclude Ray Crone as being the biter. I wasn't the only one. There were 3 other forensic dentists that are all board certified, highly qualified guys, and they excluded him.
But the jury disagreed. They sided with the prosecution's expert and found Ray Crone guilty again.
What does it take? What is this beyond reasonable doubt? What is this innocent until proven guilty? It don't exist in the justice system. The one that I've seen, it did not exist for me.
We knew that there was another person in that bathroom at the time of death. There were unknown fingerprints that came back to somebody. There was a person who had shoes that were inconsistent with the defendant. The hairs were inconsistent with the defendant. The FBI forensic people testified that these hairs were not Mr. Crone's. They were not the victim's. To me, logic and common sense told me it wasn't Mr. Crone that committed this crime, and the jury found the opposite result.
When I heard the verdict in the second trial, I really couldn't believe. It was total disbelief.
It was an absolute dog and pony show, the likes of which I've never seen before.
Ray Crone tried to reconcile himself to a life behind bars. But then, he got help from an unlikely source, the very system he had grown to despise. Ray Crone languished in prison for a crime that some of the country's top forensic experts said he didn't commit. Just before Crone's second trial, Dr. Richard Souveron, one of his defense experts, sat next to the prosecution's forensic expert, Dr. Rawson, at a scientific conference.
His comment to me was, "I'm in too deep." He knew he was wrong, but he had already committed, and if that isn't a scary thing, I don't know what is. And I hated to see him get sucked in on something like this, and told him, get out of this deal. Just say, I don't want to do it anymore, or I've changed my opinion, or I've listened to everybody else, and I've rethought my position. Anybody can make a mistake. I mean, none of us are above making mistakes. But he said, I'm in too deep, and that was the end of that conversation.
Through a spokesperson, Dr. Rawson denies that the conversation described by Dr. Souveron ever took place. It wasn't until 2001 that a new law offered Crone some hope.
Arizona, one of the first states in the United States, passed a new bill for post-conviction DNA testing, which allows convicted offenders access to evidence in post-conviction DNA testing if they contend that they were innocent.
So Crone's defense team asked the state of Arizona to test every piece of Kim Ancona's clothing for DNA. The saliva on Kim's blouse had already been tested, and the results were inconclusive. But her jeans had small blood stains. The prosecution believed the blood was Kim Ancona's. The jeans were sent to the state crime lab for a new DNA test that analyzes 13 different genetic markers. The test yielded unanticipated results. The blood on the jeans wasn't Kim Ancona's, and it wasn't Ray Crone's. But whose was it? To find out, forensic scientists entered this new DNA evidence into a national DNA database with genetic profiles of more than 1 million convicts from across the country. Profile after profile was checked and cross-referenced, and the database came up with a match to this man, a 35-year-old Native American, Kenneth Phillips, who was currently in prison for child molestation. At the time of Kim Ancona's murder, Kenneth Phillips lived just 600 yards away from the CBS lounge.
He lived right behind the bar, and his nationality was an American Indian, which was consistent with some of the other DNA results we had and the hairs that was found at the scene of the crime.
When interviewed by police, Phillips made a startling admission. He said on the morning after Kim's murder, he woke from an alcoholic blackout to find his hands covered with blood. Then he saw news of the murder on TV. His fingerprints were among the unknown fingerprints found in the bathroom where the murder took place. His shoe size matched the print from the kitchen floor, and his bite impression had the same left front tooth protruding from the rest of his teeth. For Ray Crone, the ordeal was over. After serving 10 years and 4 months for a crime he didn't commit, he walked out of prison a free man.
I'd spent over 10 years in prison. I will never forget that day I got out. In fact, I commemorated it, so I won't ever forget it.
Forensic odontologists say that the problem with the Crone case was that Dr. Rawson told jurors bite marks could match like fingerprints, but that is rarely possible.
The best that a forensic dentist can give is reasonable certainty, and that means that that's the highest level we give. There is always a remote possibility that there's someone else that has teeth similar that could have left the pattern.
Ray Crone is trying to resume his life. Experts say the lesson of his case is that bite marks are rarely definitive and should only be used to exclude, not include, suspects. Above all, they say, bite mark analysis is more opinion than fact, and that this should always be made clear to jurors.
What was allowed in Mr. Crone's case was bad science, scientific explanations given by people who were unscientific in their methods.
Interpretation of a bite mark is what convicted me. Nothing scientific, not the fingerprints that didn't match me, not they even had footprints that they couldn't match the shoes, the hair, not the DNA, none of that stuff. They used an interpretation of a bite mark to convict me.
That has no place in the courtroom, any more than perjury has a place in the courtroom. We shouldn't allow witnesses that lie, no matter what they say, whether it's regarding a scientific issue or any other issue. And in this case, it was clear that some of the scientific experts were actually misrepresenting their data and the scientific validity of what they were talking about.
At one time, tourists in South Florida were a favorite target for criminals. Hundreds of visitors were robbed, some were assaulted, and 8 were murdered. It was an out-of-town journalist who made an unexpected journey from tourist to victim to advocate. In September of 1993, Uwe Wilhelm Rockebrand and his wife flew from Germany to Florida to spend their honeymoon. They rented a car for the short trip to their hotel.
The 2 German tourists were less than 5 minutes from the airport, just time enough to read safety precautions in a visitor's guide when they became the newest victims.
A van pulled behind them and rammed their car. The couple knew this wasn't an accident, but a ploy robbers use to get drivers to stop their cars.
They call it bump and rob, but the Rockabrands did what they were supposed to do and did not stop. Then the gunman pulled alongside and fired a single shot.
33-year-old Uwe Wilhelm was killed instantly. His 27-year-old bride, Catherine, was unharmed. By the end of the year, there were 8 tourist murders in South Florida. Hundreds more were robbed and many more seriously injured. Tourists were easy targets.
You can't change people's behavior. The lost tourists, looking at street signs, the holding up of maps, the camera bags, the luggage in the back seat. You know, it's not too hard to identify a tourist, especially around the airport.
And they have what criminals want: cameras, jewelry, video equipment, laptop computers, and they usually carry plenty of cash. Helga Lust covered these tourist crimes as a journalist for German television.
I was working on a piece that was focused on the rash of crime that had taken place in the United States, specifically tourist-directed crime in Florida. And during the course of that piece, we talked about safety tips for German tourists that would be traveling to the United States.
Helga and her mother had scheduled their own Florida vacation before the crime spree started.
We decided to keep our plans of flying into Miami and then going on to the Florida Keys just for 4 days, very brief stay, but particularly because I had just done this piece about safety tips and felt that my awareness was, pretty strong at that point.
Their vacation was relaxing and uneventful. Their return to the airport was not. They got lost looking for the airport rental car area. Helga drove onto a side street to turn around. She soon realized someone was following her. The man reached through the window, put the car into park, disconnected the horn, and assaulted the 2.
My mother said, "Take whatever you want, but please don't hurt us." The passenger from their vehicle said, "Shut up, bitch, we're going to kill you." Both of the perpetrators were taking turns beating me through my window, and every punch that I took weakened me.
The attackers tried desperately to grab the car keys.
I was able to get in a good couple of blows myself.
Somehow, Helga got the car into gear and drove away. To try to stop her, the attacker bit her arm.
I hit the driver from their car with the front of our car.
After a short distance, the man was forced to let go.
I had tremendous injuries to my head, my neck, my back, dislocated jaw, lost the feeling in my left side of my face, which I've never regained. And the bite wound was very painful.
The bite wound was deep. It went through the muscle.
Even animals don't do what he did, the way he did it. Even animals don't do that. There's no need for that. To punch somebody, almost killing, paralyzing her, and then biting her and destroying her life. There's no need for that at all.
Helga described the attackers as young men, approximately 25 years old. They were driving a large, dark-colored car with tinted windows.
Most crimes happen and take place in less than 2 minutes. It's a hit, it's a theft, it's an assault, and it happens in a matter of just seconds.
So a positive identification of a suspect might be difficult. With no other witnesses or leads, police hoped Helga's car would contain the forensic evidence they needed. In 1993, 24-year-old Helga Luce barely escaped with her life after a harrowing encounter with two men who attempted to overpower her. Two veteran detectives, Bassam Fidel and Laura Lefebvre, with the Hialeah, Florida robbery squad, were assigned to the case.
And this particular robbery happened about 10 blocks north of the airport into Hialeah, into a mixed residential commercial neighborhood.
That neighborhood surrounds Lejeune Road, the only exit or entrance to the airport. Here, criminals often lie in wait for their victims.
It's the main artery. It's easy to hide, it's easy to follow. One way in and one way out of Miami International Airport.
They're hunters. They're hunting for robbery victims. It could have been your family. It could have been anybody in the community.
I'm sure as they followed her and they tailed her and targeted her, the discussion was how were they going to do it and when were they going to do it, in what manner.
At the time, rental cars were easily identified with stickers of the rental company and special license plates beginning with the letter Y or Z. Despite the increase in tourist crimes, South Florida's overall crime rate was less than the previous year. Nevertheless, the press coverage had an impact.
Miami was being hit with tourist robbery cases almost on a daily basis. This was a city that they viewed as a violent city, and they had no interest in coming back here.
European governments discouraged travel to Florida, and hotel reservations dropped by 25%. Ending the crime spree was difficult. Victims were often unwilling to return to Florida for court hearings and trials. This kept criminals on the streets. Most of the crimes were bump and rob, leaving behind little forensic evidence. But Helga's robbery had been unusually violent.
She had a bite mark located on her upper arm, and it was rather clear. I have a sexual battery background and know that they were developing bite mark comparison techniques. And the state-of-the-art place to process her was the photo lab at the medical examiner's office.
She was very sharp to immediately address that before the victim left or before the victim sought treatment, perhaps sutures or other medical treatment which can damage or alter the bite marks on the victim's arm.
Helga agreed to have a forensic photographer take pictures of the wound.
It's not enough just to take a photograph. It has to be measured properly, it has to be put into perspective, and it has to be documented properly.
It's important to get it done as quickly as you can. Things change very rapidly. Skin tends to discolor, bruising tends to set in.
In every picture, forensic protocol requires the use of a ruler to provide scale.
It's an L ruler. It has 3 circles on it that allows us to make sure that our camera is perpendicular to our subject, and that will also give us a sense of scale. So we take the flash and we hold it off to an angle where we can emphasize the surface texture of the skin.
And forensic photographers take pictures under many different light sources: conventional light, ultraviolet, infrared, and fluorescent. These show detail and texture not revealed by light in the visible spectrum.
Many times there's something there that you can't see with the naked eye.
Afterwards, investigators examined the rental car, hoping to find fingerprints.
But unfortunately, the weather was against us. Processing the outside of the vehicle was impossible.
The car was wet because Helga had driven through a thunderstorm on the way to the airport. The interior material was textured, which yielded no usable prints. No fingerprints, no witnesses, and no suspects. Helga and her mother left Miami not knowing whether the crime would ever be solved. And maybe it wouldn't have been had the perpetrator not left behind a piece of forensic evidence. Three weeks after Helga Luce's assault, she was asked to return to Florida to look through stacks of mugshots. She didn't see her attacker. Then the detective showed her a photo array of 6 suspects.
Helga looked at the lineup, and then she would look at each picture carefully. Once she got to his picture, to Stanley Cornett's picture, and you can see an immediate reaction in her, physically an immediate reaction.
When I saw the defendant's face, it was a very, very weird mix of emotions. One of joy, because I found him, and one of complete terror, because it was the first time I had seen that face since it was locked on my arm, biting through the muscle.
24-year-old Stanley Cornett was a factory worker with a long criminal history. Since the tourist attacks happened in different jurisdictions near the airport, police formed a task force to exchange information. That's how LaFave first learned about Stanley Cornett. He was arrested a few days after Helga's attack for a nearly identical crime. He allegedly stopped an elderly man in a rental car and robbed him at gunpoint, but he picked on the wrong man. The victim's son was a Miami policeman who lived just across the street.
He called for his son, and he came running out of the house. Well, a struggle ensued, and the victim tried to hold back the robber while he was calling for his son. And the robber at that time bit him in the upper arm.
To find out, police went to the same forensic expert who matched a bite wound to the notorious serial killer Ted Bundy.
From a bite mark, if it's
Cornett.
From those impressions, Dr. Souveron made these plaster models which allowed him to duplicate the bite patterns.
Test bites are made either in wax or in styrofoam to be able to analyze the patterns that these teeth are going to leave.
For further evaluation, the biting edges of the plaster teeth are blackened and the pattern copied onto a clear acetate for easy comparison with the photographs. Odontologists use a number of different techniques because there's no way to accurately estimate the elasticity of the victim's skin.
The teeth have variables, the skin has variables, and when this lady was bitten, she didn't just sit there and let this man, bite her as hard as he could. We're showing this is a dynamic bite with movement going on, and teeth numbers 24 and 25 made the marks that these arrows pointed to, and then as the bite moved, the 26th tooth made that mark.
There is no such thing as a bite impression match. All experts can say is whether a bite wound is consistent with a person's teeth. Even if they are, it's still not 100% certain. But with the model, wax impression, acetates, and precision photographs, Dr. Souveron zeroed in on 3 lower teeth in the bite mark, which were slightly crooked and overlapping. And there was a deep mark made by an upper tooth. Even to untrained eyes, it looked like Cornett's teeth caused the bite wound in the photographs. Dr. Souveron was confident in his assessment.
His teeth were consistent with that bite, and there was nothing there that could exclude him.
Stanley Cornett was charged with attempted robbery and aggravated battery. But Cornett said he was innocent and that he had an alibi. A jury would have to decide which side they believed, the alibi or the bite impression evidence.
The ironic situation of having done a news piece about safety tips and then going to Florida and becoming part of the crime statistics. Even when you think you have all the tools at your disposal to keep yourself safe, if you're at the wrong place at the wrong time, anything can happen.
As the trial approached for the brutal assault of Helga Lust, Stanley Cornett claimed he had an alibi, that he had been at work at the time of the crime. His work record showed that he was indeed at work that day. But Cornett's co-worker said he didn't always punch the time clock when leaving for a break, and he worked just 10 minutes away from where Helga was attacked.
His supervisor remembers that day in particular and remembered he left and never came back. He was soon after let go out of that job because of that. So that melted that alibi.
It's incredible that an individual would punch a time card, go to work like we all do in the morning, and he would leave during his break and go commit a violent crime against a tourist. But that's precisely what Stanley Cornett did.
Through various legal tactics, Cornett kept delaying his trial.
If my victim doesn't want to cooperate, then I have no case. And that's what these criminals count on. That's why they target the tourists. And in this case, they picked the wrong tourist. And Stanley Cornett was relying on wearing Helga Lust down to the point where she just gave up. He underestimated Helga Lust. She wasn't going to wear down. She came back for every trial date, every appointment she flew back for.
At the trial, Helga again identified Cornett as the man who attacked her.
Facing Stanley Cornett in court was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. Through all of my testimony, the defendant had a smirk on his face. So I tried really hard not to focus on him and to focus on the prosecutor and the jury and the judge and the people that were there to embrace justice.
The clarity of the bite impression photographs taken by a qualified forensic photographer alongside the cast of Cornett's teeth were what ultimately convinced the jury. Stanley Cornett was found guilty of attempted robbery and aggravated battery. Because he was a repeat offender, he was sentenced to life in prison.
I tell the detectives, if you have a bite mark case, you don't tell the defendant that you have a bite, because they certainly can alter their teeth. It happened to me 2 weeks ago, where the defendant, when I saw him, had all of his upper and lower front teeth pulled while he was in prison. He told me he had a toothache, and they pulled his teeth.
As a prosecutor at the time, if it was somewhat new to me, imagine how new it was to a jury. They had certainly never heard of anything remotely similar to bite mark evidence.
The bite mark evidence, I think, sealed this case. It put the final nail in Stanley Cornett's coffin as far as the jury is concerned, I think. It was our strongest piece of evidence.
Cornett's accomplice in the crime was never identified. By the end of 1993, the crimes against vacation travelers in South Florida stopped. Why? Police increased their surveillance of the rental car areas. Rental agencies removed their stickers from the cars and ended the practice of identifiable license plates. After her ordeal, Helga formed an advocacy group for victims of crime called Witness Justice.
She can meet them on a totally different level than a police officer can. And she can advocate for them. She can be their voice when sometimes they can't find their voice. Maybe it'll be the Helgas of this world that make more victims come back to court and get more convictions.
The last time anyone saw Rebecca Hayes alive, she was standing beneath a flickering streetlight on a quiet Texas road, holding a small notebook against her chest, unaware that someone was watching her from the darkness. The town of Red Hollow, Texas, was the kind of place where people believed they knew everyone, a place where front doors stayed unlocked, where neighbors waved from passing trucks, where rumors traveled faster than official reports. But on one cold October night in 1987, that sense of safety disappeared forever, because by sunrise, Rebecca Hayes was gone, and the person responsible vanished with her. For 38 years, the question remained unanswered. Where did Rebecca go? Who was the last person to see her alive? And why did someone go to such extreme lengths to erase every trace of what happened? The case became one of the most haunting unsolved mysteries in Texas history. A cold case buried beneath decades of silence. A file that investigators opened hundreds of times. A name that never disappeared. Rebecca Hayes, 26 years old, a high school science teacher, a daughter, a sister, a woman known throughout Red Hollow as someone who believed every mystery had an answer. Ironically, her own disappearance became the mystery nobody could solve. The night she vanished began like any other. October 17th, 1987, a Friday evening. Rebecca had stayed late at Red Hollow High School, preparing experiments for the following week. Teachers remembered seeing her in the science laboratory around 6:30 p.m. The lights were still on. Papers covered her desk. A coffee cup sat beside a stack of student assignments. Nothing appeared unusual. One co-worker later said Rebecca seemed distracted that evening, not afraid, not nervous, just focused, like she was thinking about something she had not told anyone. At 7:15 p.m., Rebecca left the school. Security cameras did not exist. No one followed her. No one saw where she went next. The only confirmed evidence was her abandoned car. It was discovered the following morning near an old service road outside town. The driver's door was unlocked. The keys were missing. Her purse was still inside. Her wallet. Her identification. Her credit cards. Everything remained untouched, except one thing. Her notebook. The small blue notebook she carried everywhere was gone. At first, investigators believe Rebecca might have left voluntarily. That theory disappeared quickly, because Rebecca had made plans. Plans she never canceled. She was supposed to meet her younger brother for breakfast the next morning. She had promised to help her student prepare for a science competition. She had a life waiting for her, but she never returned. The first search began within hours. Volunteers moved through fields. Police searched roads surrounding the abandoned vehicle. Helicopters scanned wooded areas. The entire town joined the effort. For weeks, Red Hollow became a center of attention. News crews arrived. Reporters stood outside the sheriff's office. The headline appeared across Texas newspapers. Young teacher missing after car found abandoned, mystery deepens. But as days became weeks, hope began turning into fear. The evidence was limited. The witnesses were uncertain. And every possible lead seemed to disappear. Then came the first major clue. A strange phone call. 3 days after Rebecca vanished, her family received a call at their home. No words were spoken, only silence. Then, faintly, a sound, a vehicle engine. The call lasted 11 seconds. Investigators traced the number. Nothing. A public phone booth. No fingerprints. No witnesses. No explanation. For years, that call remained one of the strangest pieces of the investigation, because whoever made it wanted Rebecca's family to know something. But what? That she was alive? That someone was watching? Or that the person responsible was close enough to reach them? The investigation intensified. Detectives interviewed everyone connected to Rebecca: friends, co-workers, former students, neighbors. But one name kept appearing: Daniel Cross, Rebecca's former boyfriend. They had dated for almost 2 years before breaking up several months earlier. Daniel was immediately considered a person of interest, not because investigators had evidence against him, but because he was one of the last people known to have spoken with Rebecca. Daniel admitted they talked the night she disappeared. He said Rebecca called him around 6:50 p.m. According to Daniel, she sounded normal. She asked him about a book he had borrowed. They spoke for several minutes. Then she said she had somewhere to go. Daniel claimed he asked where. Rebecca did not answer. That detail bothered investigators, because it suggested Rebecca was meeting someone she did not want to discuss. Daniel passed a polygraph test. No physical evidence connected him to the disappearance, but suspicion followed him for years. The town never forgot. Every unanswered question created another rumor. Some believed Rebecca discovered something at the school. Others believed she was targeted because of someone in her personal life. But one detail remained impossible to ignore. 2 weeks before she disappeared, Rebecca had contacted the local newspaper. She asked about publishing an article. The topic? Missing evidence from an old criminal investigation. At the time, nobody understood why a science teacher would investigate an old case. But detectives later discovered Rebecca had been researching something for months. A decades-old incident involving a local businessman, a man named Walter Pierce. In 1981, Walter Pierce disappeared after leaving a business meeting outside Red Hollow. His case was never solved. The investigation went cold. The file was forgotten. Until Rebecca found it. She believed Walter's disappearance was connected to something much larger, a hidden pattern, a series of unexplained events. And according to notes found inside her classroom desk after she vanished, Rebecca had written one sentence: "Someone has been hiding the truth for years." That sentence changed the direction of the investigation, because it suggested Rebecca was not simply a victim. She may have been searching for something someone desperately wanted to remain buried. And somewhere inside that missing notebook was the answer she had discovered before she disappeared. For 38 years, investigators searched for that notebook. They searched for Rebecca. They searched for the person who took her. But the truth remained locked away until one forgotten piece of evidence was tested again. A piece of evidence sitting in storage. A piece everyone believed had no value. A piece that would eventually reveal a DNA match so shocking it would force the entire case to be rewritten. Because the killer was not a stranger. The killer had been there all along, watching, waiting, and believing that time would erase everything. For nearly 4 decades, the evidence room in Red Hollow County carried the weight of unanswered questions, thousands of files, hundreds of forgotten names, cases that had slowly faded from public memory. But one box remained different, a small cardboard container labeled, "Hayes, Rebecca, 1987. Inside were the few remaining pieces of a mystery that had haunted Texas investigators for generations. A photograph of Rebecca standing beside her classroom, a damaged cassette tape, several witness statements, a worn-out map of the area where her car was found, and a small evidence bag containing something nobody considered important at the time. A single piece of fabric recovered from the driver's seat of her abandoned vehicle. In 1987, forensic technology was limited. Investigators examined the fabric. They found no visible blood, no fingerprints, no obvious clue. The evidence was sealed, stored, forgotten. For 38 years, it sat untouched until a new generation of investigators reopened the case. And everything changed. The decision to review Rebecca Hayes' disappearance came after a series of breakthroughs in other cold cases across Texas. Cases once considered impossible to solve were suddenly being reopened because of advances in DNA technology. Old evidence was being tested again. Old assumptions were being questioned, and investigators began asking the same question. What if the answer was never missing? What if it was simply overlooked? Detective Laura Mitchell was assigned to review the Hayes file. She had been with the Texas Cold Case Unit for 12 years, known for solving cases others had abandoned. But even she admitted the Rebecca Hayes investigation was different. This wasn't just a file, she later said. This was a person whose family had been waiting almost 40 years for an answer. The first thing Mitchell noticed was how little physical evidence existed. The original investigation depended heavily on interviews, memory, statements, people's versions of events. And memories change, especially after decades. Witnesses forget details. Stories become mixed with assumptions. But evidence does not forget. Mitchell began rebuilding the timeline from the beginning. October 17, 1987, 6:30 p.m. Rebecca was still at Red Hollow High School. 6:50 p.m. Rebecca called Daniel Cross. 7:15 p.m. Rebecca left the school. 7:42 p.m. A witness reported seeing a vehicle parked near the old service road. 8:05 p.m. Rebecca's phone stopped responding. And after that, nothing. No confirmed sightings. No verified calls. No evidence of where she went. For years, investigators focused on a wrong question. They asked, who wanted Rebecca gone? But Mitchell asked something different. What did Rebecca know? That question led investigators back to her classroom. The room had changed completely since 1987. The walls were repainted, the equipment replaced, the desks removed, but the storage cabinets remained. And inside an old drawer, investigators found something unexpected. A collection of Rebecca's personal research notes. They had been overlooked for decades. Most were related to science projects, student assignments, teaching materials. Then investigators found a folder hidden behind old textbooks. The folder contained newspaper clippings, property records, handwritten notes, and photographs. The subject was Walter Pierce, the businessman who disappeared in 1981. Rebecca had spent months investigating his case. But why? The answer appeared in one of her notes. The same names keep appearing. Investigators examined the names. One stood out. Charles Bennett. In 1987, Charles Bennett was one of the most respected men in Red Hollow, a successful businessman, a community donor, a person whose name appeared regularly in local newspapers. He had also been connected to Walter Pierce, and according to Rebecca's notes, he was one of the last people to see Pierce alive. But there was something else. Charles Bennett was also connected to the land near the service road where Rebecca's car was found, the same area where Walter Pierce disappeared 6 years earlier. A coincidence? Maybe. But Rebecca clearly did not think so. She had written another sentence. 2 disappearances. Same location. Same people. The discovery changed the investigation. For the first time, detectives considered that Rebecca's disappearance might not have been personal. It might have been connected to something older, something that had been hidden for years. Investigators searched through Walter Pierce's original case file. The similarities were disturbing. Pierce's vehicle had also been found abandoned. His personal belongings were left behind. His wallet remained inside. Only one item was missing, a notebook. The same type of notebook Rebecca carried. The same type of notebook she was holding the night she disappeared. Detectives began wondering if the missing notebooks were connected. Were they simply personal items, or were they evidence? The theory became stronger when investigators discovered an old photograph from Walter Pierce's office. The photograph showed Pierce standing outside a warehouse. Beside him were 3 men. One was Charles Bennett. The second was Richard Sloan, a local attorney. The third was someone investigators had never considered, a police officer. Officer Mark Ellison. In 1987, Ellison was assigned to the Rebecca Hayes investigation. He was one of the first officers to arrive at the scene where her car was discovered. He had collected the evidence. He had written the reports. He had controlled access to the vehicle. The discovery stunned investigators because it raised a terrifying possibility. What if someone involved in the original investigation was connected to the disappearance? Detective Mitchell immediately reviewed Officer Ellison's reports. One detail caught her attention: the fabric sample from Rebecca's car, the evidence that had been stored for decades. The report stated, unknown material, no further testing recommended. But Mitchell noticed something unusual. The sample description had been changed. The original handwriting showed a different note beneath the final report, a sentence partially covered by correction fluid. Using forensic imaging, investigators recovered the hidden writing. It said, possible human biological material present. The discovery was enormous because in 1987, investigators may have overlooked the most important evidence in the entire case. The fabric was not just debris. It may have carried DNA. DNA from the person who was inside Rebecca's vehicle, the person who touched the driver's seat, the person who may have taken her. The evidence was immediately transferred to the state laboratory. Forensic specialists carefully removed decades of contamination. They extracted a partial DNA profile, a profile nobody expected to find, a profile that had been waiting since 1987. When the laboratory entered the DNA into national databases, the system returned a result, a match. A name appeared on the screen, and everyone inside the laboratory went silent because the DNA belonged to someone who had been part of the Rebecca Hayes investigation from the very beginning, someone who had spent decades believing the truth would remain buried, someone who had answered questions, signed reports, and looked directly into the eyes of Rebecca's family. The cold case was no longer frozen. The killer had a name, and for the first time in 38 years, investigators knew exactly where to look. The name on the laboratory report changed everything. For several seconds, nobody in the room spoke. The investigators had prepared themselves for almost any possibility. A stranger, a forgotten suspect, someone who had disappeared from the area decades ago. But they were not prepared for this. The DNA profile belonged to Officer Mark Ellison, the same man who had responded to the original crime scene, the same officer who helped search for Rebecca Hayes, the same officer who collected evidence from her abandoned vehicle, the man whose signature appeared on the first page of the investigation file, a person who had spent 38 years standing on the other side of the case, a person who had never been considered a suspect because he was supposed to be looking for the truth, not hiding it. The discovery sent shockwaves through Red Hollow County. For decades, residents remembered Ellison as one of the officers who never gave up. He appeared at community meetings. He spoke to reporters. He promised Rebecca's family that every possible lead would be followed. Now investigators had evidence suggesting he may have known much more than he ever admitted. But a DNA match was only the beginning. The cold case unit knew that a connection alone was not enough. They needed to understand how Officer Ellison's DNA ended up inside Rebecca's vehicle. Was it from the night she disappeared? Or was it from routine contact during the investigation? That question became the center of the case, because Ellison had a reasonable explanation. He had touched the car. He had collected evidence. He had searched the vehicle. His DNA being present was not automatically proof of a crime. Investigators needed more. They needed a timeline. They needed motive. They needed the truth hidden beneath 38 years of carefully controlled information. Detective Lauren Mitchell returned to the original evidence reports. This time, she read them differently, not as the work of investigators trying to solve a case, but as the actions of someone who may have been manipulating one. The first inconsistency appeared in the vehicle report. The abandoned car was discovered at 6:20 a.m. by a farmer named Henry Lawson. He reported that the vehicle was sitting near the old service road. The driver's door was open. The headlights were off. The vehicle appeared untouched. But Officer Ellison's report stated something different. It claimed the driver's door was locked when police arrived. A small detail, almost meaningless, except investigators now knew the car had been accessed before the official search began. Someone had been inside. Someone had changed the scene. The second inconsistency involved Rebecca's missing notebook. In the original report, Ellison wrote, "No personal documents found missing." But Rebecca's family had always said the blue notebook was the one item she carried everywhere. Her mother had told police about it on the first day. Why was it missing from the report? Why had it never been listed? Why had nobody searched for it? The answers pointed toward one possibility. Someone wanted investigators looking at the wrong things. The missing notebook was not a forgotten personal item. It was evidence, and someone knew it. The investigation moved toward Officer Ellison's history. At the time Rebecca disappeared, Ellison was 41 years old, a respected officer, a veteran of the department. But when investigators reviewed his career records, they found several unusual incidents: complaints, internal reviews, missing paperwork. Nothing serious enough to end his career, but enough to reveal a pattern. Ellison had a reputation for controlling information. He decided what details entered reports. He decided what evidence received attention. And in several old cases, witnesses later claimed their statements had been altered. One former detective agreed to speak anonymously. He had worked with Ellison during the 1980s. He remembered Rebecca's case. He remembered the pressure. The whole department wanted an answer, he said, but Ellison always seemed too certain. Investigators asked what he meant. The retired detective explained. Everyone else was asking questions. Ellison was already explaining. That sentence became important, because people who know the truth often tell stories differently. They do not search for answers. They provide conclusions. And investigators believed Ellison had provided conclusions too quickly. The original theory of the case was that Rebecca disappeared voluntarily or was taken by someone connected to her personal life. Daniel Cross became the focus. The investigation centered around him. But now detectives discovered something disturbing. Daniel had an alibi, a confirmed one. Bank records showed he was 40 miles away at the time Rebecca's car was likely moved. Witnesses confirmed his location, yet the suspicion against him lasted decades. Why? Because someone had guided investigators toward him, and that person was Officer Ellison. The cold case team found notes from the original investigation, pages of interviews, pages of theories. One section contained a handwritten statement. Cross remains primary focus. But beside it, investigators found another note written later. Different handwriting, different ink. It read, "Continue pressure. Do not shift attention." The note had no signature, but forensic handwriting analysis revealed a possible match. Mark Ellison. The evidence was becoming impossible to ignore, but investigators still needed to know why. Why would a police officer kill Rebecca Hayes? What could a science teacher possibly have discovered that was worth destroying a life and protecting for decades? The answer came from the missing notebook, not the original one. A copy, hidden among Rebecca's old research files. A page she had photographed before disappearing. The image was damaged, but one sentence was clear. Walter Pierce did not disappear because of money. He disappeared because he found out who was involved. Investigators returned to the 1981 case. They discovered that Walter Pierce had uncovered financial fraud involving several local businesses. Companies connected to Charles Bennett. Companies connected to Richard Sloan. companies connected to land acquisitions around Red Hollow. And one more connection. Officer Mark Ellison. Before becoming a police officer, Ellison had worked security for one of Bennett's companies, a fact never mentioned in the original investigation, a fact Rebecca had discovered, a fact that could have exposed everything. The timeline became clearer. Walter Pierce discovered the scheme. He disappeared. Years later, Rebecca found his case. She noticed the same names. She began investigating. She got too close. And then she vanished. The question investigators now faced was terrifying. Was Rebecca killed because she knew about the old crime? Or because she was about to reveal who protected it? The answer seemed to be buried inside the final piece of evidence, the blue notebook. The one item still missing. The one thing that could reveal exactly what Rebecca discovered before she died. For 38 years, everyone searched for Rebecca Hayes. Now investigators realized they had been searching for something else. The truth she left behind. And somewhere in Texas, someone had spent decades making sure nobody ever found it. The discovery of Officer Mark Ellison's DNA inside Rebecca Hayes' abandoned vehicle transformed the investigation from a mystery into a race against time. Because even though the evidence was powerful, investigators knew the clock was still moving. Mark Ellison was 79 years old. He had retired from law enforcement more than a decade earlier. He lived quietly outside Red Hollow, a man who neighbors described as polite, helpful, almost invisible. For 38 years, he had lived with the reputation of someone who tried to solve one of the town's most painful mysteries. Now investigators had to confront a reality nobody wanted to accept. The person who may have held the answers was the same person who helped create the questions. A warrant was issued to search Ellison's home. The announcement spread quickly. Within hours, the quiet neighborhood became surrounded by investigators and media vehicles. Residents stood outside watching. Many could not believe what they were seeing. They remembered Ellison. They trusted him. He was the officer who stood beside Rebecca's family during the worst moments of their lives. The idea that he could be involved felt impossible. But investigators had learned something over decades of cold cases. The truth rarely arrives looking the way people expect. Inside Ellison's home, investigators found thousands of pages of documents, old police reports, newspaper clippings, personal notes, photographs. At first, everything appeared ordinary. A retired officer keeping memories from his career. Then investigators discovered a locked cabinet in his office. Inside were files, not official police files, private files, hundreds of pages, many related to cases Ellison had investigated. But one file immediately stood out, a faded folder labeled Hayes, R. Inside were documents that should never have been there, copies of evidence reports, witness interviews, crime scene photographs, documents that were supposed to remain inside the official investigation archive. The discovery suggested something disturbing. Ellison had continued following Rebecca's case long after it was considered inactive. But why? Was he obsessed with solving it? Or was he protecting something? The answer began appearing inside his personal notes. Investigators found pages of handwritten observations, names, dates, locations. The notes appeared to track people connected to the case, including Rebecca's family, her co-workers, her former boyfriend Daniel Cross, and even detectives assigned to review the investigation decades later. Ellison had not simply followed the case. He had monitored everyone connected to it. Then investigators found something that changed the entire direction of the search. A photograph. Taken in 1987. The image showed Rebecca Hayes standing outside Red Hollow High School, the same photograph that had appeared in newspapers after her disappearance. But written on the back were words that had never been seen before. She found the Pierce file. Investigators immediately compared the handwriting. It matched Ellison's personal notes. The message proved something important. Ellison knew Rebecca was investigating Walter Pierce before she disappeared, but it still did not explain everything. The question remained, how did Rebecca discover the connection. And what exactly was inside the Pierce file? Investigators searched deeper into Walter Pierce's history. They discovered he was not just a businessman. He had secretly collected evidence, financial records, contracts, bank statements, photographs, documents showing illegal property transfers. Pierce had been building a case against a group of influential people in Red Hollow, the same people who appeared repeatedly in Rebecca's research: Charles Bennett, Richard Sloan, and Mark Ellison. But one document stood apart, a letter written by Walter Pierce 3 months before his disappearance. The letter was addressed to a journalist in Austin. It contained a warning. "If anything happens to me, look at the people who benefit from my silence." The letter was never mailed. It was found years later inside Pierce's abandoned office. The journalist never received it. The information died with him, until Rebecca found it. The cold case team now understood why Rebecca had become a threat. She was not just investigating an old disappearance. She was rebuilding a case that someone had destroyed, and Mark Ellison knew it. Investigators returned to Rebecca's final week. They examined every phone record, every witness statement, every movement. Then they found a call that had been overlooked. October 17th, 1987, the day Rebecca disappeared. At 5:58 p.m., a call was placed to Red Hollow High School. The call was unknown. The call lasted less than 1 minute. Originally, investigators assumed it was a routine conversation, but new technology allowed them to recover old telephone records. The number was traced. It belonged to a private line, a line registered to a business owned by Charles Bennett, the same businessman connected to Walter Pierce, the same businessman connected to Rebecca's investigation. But the biggest discovery came from the call itself. A former school employee remembered seeing Rebecca after the call. She said Rebecca looked surprised, not scared, not angry, surprised, as if someone had told her something unexpected. Investigators believe that call changed Rebecca's plans. It convinced her to go somewhere, to meet someone. The question was who. The answer came from another recovered document, a handwritten note found hidden beneath Rebecca's classroom desk. Only one sentence. Mark says he can prove everything. The room went silent when detectives read it, because Rebecca was not planning to meet a stranger. She was planning to meet Mark Ellison, the officer assigned to investigate her disappearance, the man who claimed to be searching for her, the man whose DNA was found inside her car. The investigation had finally reached a point where everything connected, but investigators still needed the most important piece: the reason. Why would Mark Ellison risk everything? Why would a police officer help cover up a decades-old crime? The answer came from a discovery inside Ellison's private files, a document dated 1981, a document signed by Walter Pierce, a document proving that Mark Ellison was not simply connected to the people involved. He was one of them. The paper revealed that Ellison had received money from Charles Bennett's company, payments hidden through a private security contract, payments made shortly before Walter Pierce disappeared, and then another payment 6 years later. October 1987, the same month Rebecca Hayes vanished. The cold case was no longer about a missing teacher. It was about a secret that had survived because the person protecting it wore a badge. For 38 years, investigators searched for the person who took Rebecca away. Now they finally understood. The killer was never hiding in the shadows. He was standing in the light, wearing a uniform, answering questions, and promising a family that he would find the truth, a promise he had no intention of keeping. The evidence against Mark Ellison continued to grow, but investigators knew one thing: a theory was not justice. A suspicion was not a conviction. After 38 years, they could not afford to make the same mistakes that allowed the case to remain unsolved for so long. Every detail had to be proven. Every timeline had to be rebuilt. Every assumption had to be challenged, because the person they were investigating was not an unknown criminal. He was a former police officer, a man who understood investigations, a man who knew exactly how evidence was collected, and possibly a man who knew exactly how to destroy it. The search of Ellison's home continued for nearly 2 weeks. Investigators cataloged every document, every photograph, every recording, every piece of information he had hidden away. Then they found something inside a locked drawer beneath his office desk, a small cassette tape, no label, no date, just 3 numbers written on the plastic case. October 17th, 87, the date Rebecca Hayes disappeared. The discovery immediately changed the investigation. Forensic specialists restored the damaged tape. At first, there was almost nothing. Static, distortion, the sound of movement. Then, slowly, a voice. Rebecca Hayes. The investigators froze. After 38 years, they were hearing her voice again, alive, calm, unaware of what was about to happen. The recording appeared to have been made inside a vehicle. Rebecca was speaking with someone, a man. The audio quality was poor, but one sentence was clear. Rebecca said, "I thought you wanted to help me." The man responded, "I did." A pause. "Until you made this impossible." Those words became the center of the investigation because they suggested something important. Rebecca trusted this person. She believed he was helping her. She did not expect danger. She did not expect betrayal. The recording continued. Rebecca mentioned Walter Pierce. She mentioned the documents. She mentioned names. Then the man's voice became angry. "You don't understand what you're involved in." Rebecca answered, "No, I understand exactly." A loud sound followed. A struggle. The recording ended, but it was enough. Investigators now had evidence that Rebecca's disappearance was not random. It was connected to her investigation, and the person with her knew exactly what she had discovered. The next challenge was identifying the voice. The forensic audio team compared it with known recordings, police interviews, public speeches, training videos, anything connected to Mark Ellison. The results were not immediate. The audio was damaged. The voice was older. The recording was short. But after weeks of analysis, experts reached a conclusion. The voice was consistent with Mark Ellison. Not a perfect match, but strong enough to support the other evidence. The case against him became overwhelming. Yet one question remained. What happened after the recording stopped? Where did Rebecca go? And where was the missing notebook? Investigators believe the notebook contained information that could expose the entire operation. They searched Ellison's property again. This time, they focused on places connected to the past, not modern hiding spots. Old ones. The garage, the basement, the storage areas, places someone might hide something and expect nobody to look for decades. Behind a wall panel in the basement, investigators discovered a hidden compartment. Inside were dozens of items, old newspaper articles, a camera, several photographs, and a blue notebook. The moment detectives saw it, nobody moved. After 38 years, they had found Rebecca's notebook, the missing piece, the object that had disappeared the same night she did. The notebook was carefully examined. Many pages were damaged. Some writing had faded, but enough remained. Enough to reveal Rebecca's final investigation. The first pages contained notes about Walter Pierce. The middle pages contained names, companies, dates, financial records. But the final pages revealed the most shocking discovery. Rebecca had uncovered a connection between Walter Pierce's disappearance and a group of people inside local law enforcement. She had written, "They didn't investigate Pierce because they already knew what happened." Another page said, "Ellison is involved. He knows I found the files." And the final entry, written only hours before she disappeared, "Meeting him tonight. He says he has proof. If he is telling the truth, everything changes." Investigators stared at that sentence because it explained the entire tragedy. Rebecca believed Mark Ellison was going to help her. She trusted the badge. She trusted the person who claimed to be on her side. And that trust led her directly into danger. The discovery devastated Rebecca's family. For years, they believed the person responsible was someone unknown, a stranger, a person who appeared from nowhere. The reality was much worse. The person who ended Rebecca's life was someone who had promised to find her, someone who stood beside them during the search, someone who attended press conferences, someone who told them to remain hopeful. Mark Ellison. The arrest warrant was prepared, but before investigators moved, they needed one more piece of evidence. They needed to understand the full scope of the conspiracy, because Rebecca's notebook revealed more than one person involved. Several names appeared repeatedly: Charles Bennett, Richard Sloan, and another name investigators recognized immediately, a person who had escaped attention for decades, a person who was still alive. The discovery suggested Mark Ellison may not have acted alone. He may have been protecting a much larger secret, a secret connected to Walter Pierce, a secret connected to Rebecca, and a secret that had survived because everyone involved believed one thing: that 38 years was enough time to bury the truth forever. They were wrong, because time does not erase evidence. It only hides it. And sometimes, all it takes is one forgotten notebook, one overlooked DNA sample, and one investigator willing to open an old file one more time. The discovery of Rebecca Hayes' notebook became the moment the entire case changed forever. For 38 years, investigators searched for a missing person. Now they finally understood they had been searching for a missing story. A story Rebecca had tried to tell before someone silenced her. The blue notebook contained everything she had uncovered. Every name, every connection, every question, and every warning sign she had noticed before the night she disappeared. The first pages described Walter Pierce's final months. Rebecca had reconstructed his movements using newspaper reports, business records, and interviews with people who knew him. She believed Pierce had discovered a hidden financial operation involving several local companies. But she also discovered something far more disturbing. The people connected to the scheme were not operating alone. They had protection. Someone inside the system was helping them. Rebecca had written one sentence repeatedly throughout the notebook: "The money explains the crime. The power explains the silence." Investigators understood what she meant. Money could create a motive, but money alone could not explain how an entire investigation failed, how evidence disappeared, how witnesses stayed quiet, how a missing woman could vanish for decades without a single person coming forward. There had to be influence. There had to be fear. And according to Rebecca's notes, there had to be someone inside law enforcement. The focus returned to Mark Ellison. The former officer had spent years presenting himself as the person closest to the truth, but the evidence now suggested he had been closest to the crime. Investigators prepared to arrest him, but before they moved, they needed to understand the full network around him, because Rebecca's notebook contained another discovery, a name that appeared dozens of times: Charles Bennett. For decades, Bennett had been remembered as one of Red Hollow's most successful businessmen, a man who donated money to schools, a man who supported local charities, a man whose name appeared on buildings throughout the county. But Rebecca had discovered another side. Behind the public image was a series of questionable business deals, land purchases, hidden partnerships, private agreements, and payments made to people who could influence investigations, including Mark Ellison. The investigators searched old financial records. At first, they found nothing. The companies connected to Bennett had been dissolved. The bank accounts were closed. The paperwork appeared clean. Then forensic accountants discovered something hidden inside archived tax documents, a series of payments from Bennett-owned companies. The payments were described as consulting services, but the recipients were not consultants. They were people connected to law enforcement, including Mark Ellison. The payments began in 1981, the same year Walter Pierce disappeared, and they continued until 1987, the year Rebecca vanished. The pattern was clear: the same network, the same people, the same silence. Investigators now believed Rebecca had discovered a decades-long operation, a system built on money, influence, and fear. But one question remained. Why kill Rebecca? Why not simply discredit her? Why not threaten her? Why risk everything after decades of keeping the secret hidden? The answer came from the final pages of the notebook. Rebecca had written about a document she found inside Walter Pierce's files, a document she believed could destroy everyone involved. She called it the original ledger. The ledger contained financial records, names, amounts, dates. It showed exactly who received money and when. Rebecca believed it was the missing link between Walter Pierce's disappearance and the corruption inside Red Hollow. But the ledger itself was missing. The notebook contained only photographs of several pages, not the original document, which meant someone else still had it, someone who had been protecting it for years. Investigators questioned former employees connected to Charles Bennett's companies. Most refused to speak. Some claimed they knew nothing. Others said they were afraid. Then one person finally agreed to cooperate, a retired accountant named Susan Miller. In 1987, Susan worked for Bennett Development Group. She was responsible for maintaining financial records. She remembered Rebecca. She remembered the questions. And she remembered the moment she realized Rebecca was in danger. Susan told investigators that Rebecca had visited her office 2 weeks before disappearing. Rebecca asked about payments made to Mark Ellison. Susan admitted she was terrified. She told Rebecca to stop asking questions, but Rebecca refused. She said, "If nobody says anything, they win forever." Susan revealed that she had kept copies of certain financial documents she believed could one day expose the truth. Investigators asked where those documents were. Susan hesitated. Then she answered, in a place nobody would think to look. She led investigators to an abandoned storage building outside Red Hollow. The building had been empty for more than 20 years. Inside, beneath broken equipment and old furniture, they found a metal container. Inside that container were financial records, photographs, and the original ledger. The document Rebecca had been searching for. The evidence was overwhelming. The ledger showed payments to Mark Ellison, Richard Sloan, and several other officials. But the final page revealed something nobody expected, a payment made after Rebecca disappeared. The date, November 1987. The recipient, Mark Ellison. The description, final resolution. Investigators stared at the phrase, because it suggested Rebecca's disappearance was not an isolated act. It was an assignment, a problem to be removed, and Mark Ellison had been paid to handle it. The arrest finally came 2 days later. Mark Ellison was taken into custody outside his home. He did not resist. He did not run. He simply looked at the investigators and said, "You waited too long." Detective Lauren Mitchell responded, "No." She held up the evidence file. "We waited exactly long enough." The former officer was charged with murder, evidence tampering, and conspiracy for the first time in 38 years. The person who had controlled the investigation was now the subject of one. But as detectives prepared the case for trial, they discovered something disturbing. Mark Ellison was not the only person still connected to the conspiracy. Charles Bennett was dead. Richard Sloan was missing. Several others had disappeared from public life. But someone had been watching the investigation. Someone knew the notebook had been found. Someone knew Ellison was going to be arrested. And shortly after the arrest, a new message arrived at the sheriff's office. No name. No return address. Only 5 words. "You found the wrong ending." The cold case had been solved, but the investigation was not finished, because the final clue had revealed the killer. It had not yet revealed everyone who helped him. The arrest of Mark Ellison was supposed to be the moment Red Hollow finally moved forward. For 38 years, the town had carried the weight of uncertainty. Families had waited. Investigators had searched. Witnesses had grown old, carrying secrets they refused to reveal. Now, for the first time, the person accused of taking Rebecca Hayes away was behind bars. But the message left at the sheriff's office changed everything. You found the wrong ending. Those 5 words created a new wave of fear because they suggested someone else was still watching. Someone who knew the investigation. Someone who knew what evidence had been discovered. Someone who knew the truth about what happened in 1987. Detective Lauren Mitchell read the message several times. She studied the paper. The ink, the handwriting, the delivery method. Nothing. No fingerprints. No useful evidence. But one detail bothered her. The paper was not new. It was taken from an old legal pad, a type of paper commonly used inside government offices during the 1980s. The same kind of paper found in old police files. The same kind of paper Rebecca used for her research notes. Someone was not simply sending a threat. They were sending a message. They wanted investigators to understand the past was still alive. The cold case unit reopened every connection surrounding Mark Ellison. They examined his relationship with Charles Bennett. They examined payments, phone records, property transactions, and slowly another figure began appearing. Richard Sloan, the attorney who had worked with Bennett, the man connected to Walter Pierce, the man Rebecca had written about repeatedly. Unlike Bennett, Sloan had not died. Unlike Ellison, Sloan had not been arrested. He had simply disappeared. In 1994, Richard Sloan sold his law practice. He told colleagues he was retiring. He moved away. No public appearances. No interviews. No explanation. For decades, investigators assumed he was irrelevant. Now they questioned everything. A search of old records revealed something important. Sloan had represented several companies involved in the Red Hollow land deals, but he had also represented Mark Ellison personally, including during an internal police investigation in 1986, a year before Rebecca disappeared. That investigation had been closed. The reason? Insufficient evidence. But Rebecca had discovered something different. She had written. Sloan didn't defend Ellison. He protected him. The investigators began searching for Richard Sloan. They found him living under a different name in New Mexico. 78 years old. Quiet. Living alone. When investigators arrived, he did not appear surprised. In fact, he seemed almost relieved. Before they could ask questions, Sloan said, "I wonder when someone would finally come." The interview lasted 6 hours. At first, Sloan denied everything. He claimed he barely knew Rebecca. He claimed he had no involvement with Walter Pierce. He claimed Mark Ellison acted alone. But investigators presented the evidence, the ledger, the payments, the photographs, the notebook. Slowly, the lawyer's confidence began to disappear. Then Detective Mitchell placed one final item on the table. The message. You found the wrong ending. Sloan stared at it. For the first time, his expression changed, because he recognized it. "You know who sent this," Mitchell said. Sloan remained silent. "Don't you?" Finally, he answered, "Yes." The room became still. "Who?" Sloan looked toward the window. Then he whispered, "Someone who should have been dead years ago." That sentence immediately changed the investigation, because investigators believed everyone connected to the original conspiracy had been identified. They were wrong. Sloan revealed that Charles Bennett was not the person who controlled everything. Neither was Mark Ellison. They were simply pieces, people who handled different parts of the operation. The person who organized everything was someone else, someone who never appeared in the newspapers, someone who never attended public meetings, someone who remained invisible. Sloan said the operation began years before Walter Pierce disappeared. The goal was not just money. It was control. The group wanted ownership of valuable land around Red Hollow, but they needed information. They needed people inside government. They needed someone who could remove obstacles. That person recruited Bennett. Bennett recruited Ellison. And Sloan handled the legal side. But there was always someone above them, someone making the final decisions. Investigators asked Sloan for the name. He refused. Not because he wanted to protect that person, because he was afraid. Detective Mitchell leaned forward. You have spent 38 years hiding the truth. Why are you afraid now? Sloan looked directly at her. Because Mark was never the most dangerous person involved. Those words changed the entire case. The investigators now face a new possibility. Mark Ellison may have killed Rebecca, but someone else may have ordered it. Someone who had remained untouched for decades. Someone who had watched investigators chase the wrong suspects. The search shifted. Investigators examined old property records again. This time, they searched for the hidden owner behind the companies. The name appeared in places nobody had looked before. A trust, a private organization, a legal entity created in 1976. The beneficiary was hidden, but the original documents contained one signature, a signature that connected everything. The person behind the trust was Thomas Voss, a name almost forgotten. In 1987, Thomas Voss was a wealthy investor, a businessman who rarely appeared publicly. He owned several companies, several properties, and several pieces of land around Red Hollow, including the area near the old service road where Rebecca's car was discovered. Investigators searched his background. They discovered something shocking. Thomas Voss had known Walter Pierce. He had hired Charles Bennett. He had funded several projects involving Richard Sloan, and according to financial records, he had paid Mark Ellison. The entire network finally had a center, but there was one problem. Thomas Voss had died in 1998. Another suspect gone. Another person who could never stand trial. Yet investigators discovered something else. A hidden storage unit registered under Voss's name. A unit that had remained untouched for 25 years. Inside was a collection of files, and among those files was a recording. A recording made shortly before Voss died. The label contained only one sentence. If they ever find Rebecca's notebook, investigators press play, and after 38 years, they finally heard the voice of the person who may have started everything. A voice that revealed a truth nobody expected, because the person speaking on that tape did not sound like someone hiding a crime. He sounded like someone who believed he had one, and his first words were, "They will never understand what really happened to Rebecca Hayes." The recording found inside Thomas Voss's storage unit became the most important discovery in the entire investigation. For decades, investigators had chased fragments, a missing notebook, a forgotten payment, a suspicious report, a damaged piece of evidence. But now, for the first time, they had the voice of someone who had been connected to the entire chain of events. Thomas Voss, the man who had remained hidden behind companies' trusts and other people's actions, the man whose name rarely appeared in official documents, the man who investigators believed was the architect behind the operation. The recording was transferred to the forensic audio department. Experts carefully restored the damaged tape. The voice became clearer. The word became impossible to ignore. They will never understand what really happened to Rebecca Hayes. The recording continued. Voss spoke calmly, almost casually, as if he was explaining a business decision, not a crime. He described Walter Pierce as a problem. He described Rebecca as a threat. But the most disturbing part was not what he said. It was what he did not say. He never expressed regret, never questioned his actions, never admitted wrongdoing. Instead, he spoke about control, about protecting investments, about removing risks. Investigators realized something terrifying. To Voss, Rebecca Hayes was not a person. She was an obstacle, someone standing between him and something he wanted. The recording lasted 17 minutes. And within those 17 minutes, investigators discovered the timeline they had been missing. In 1981, Walter Pierce uncovered financial irregularities connected to Voss's companies. Pierce threatened to expose the operation. Voss turned to Charles Bennett. Bennett used his influence. Richard Sloan handled legal protection, and Mark Ellison controlled the investigation. Walter Pierce disappeared. The case went nowhere. 6 years later, Rebecca Hayes found the same documents. She followed the same trail. She discovered the same names. and Voss realized history was repeating itself. The recording revealed the moment Rebecca became a target. Voss said, "She was intelligent, too intelligent. She found what Pierce found." Investigators listened in silence, because those words confirmed what Rebecca's notebook suggested. She was not randomly chosen. She was targeted because she uncovered the truth. The recording continued. Voss mentioned the meeting at Miller Quarry. He mentioned Ellison. He mentioned the notebook. Then he said something that changed the case again. Ellison was supposed to scare her, not eliminate her. The room went silent, because it suggested something investigators had never considered. Mark Ellison may not have planned to kill Rebecca. Something went wrong. The investigators returned to the recovered cassette tape from Rebecca's car. They listened again. This time, they focused on the final seconds. The struggle. The movement. The sound after the argument. Using advanced audio enhancement, specialists isolated another noise. A second vehicle. Rebecca was not alone with Ellison. Someone else was there. Someone arrived after the confrontation began. Someone who changed the outcome. The investigation now had a new question. If Ellison was responsible, who was the second person? The answer appeared in the recording. Thomas Voss mentioned a name detectives had heard before, but never considered important. Harold Kane. In 1987, Harold Kane was a maintenance supervisor at Red Hollow High School, a quiet employee, someone who rarely spoke, someone who had reported seeing Rebecca leave the school. His statement had been considered insignificant. He claimed he saw nothing unusual, but Voss's recording revealed something different. Harold Kane had been working for Bennett Development Group for years. He was not just a school employee. He was an informant. Someone placed close to Rebecca. Someone who could monitor what she discovered. Investigators immediately reviewed Kane's original interview. A detail stood out. Kane claimed he left the school parking lot at 6:45 p.m., but Rebecca's phone record showed she received a call at 6:50 p.m., a call from inside the school. Someone was still there, someone who had access. Investigators searched for Harold Kane. They discovered he had died in 2012, but his family still lived in Red Hollow. And inside his old belongings, investigators found something unexpected, a journal. Hidden inside a locked drawer, the journal contained entries from 1987. At first, they appeared ordinary. Work schedules, maintenance notes, daily activities. Then investigators reached October 17th, the day Rebecca disappeared. The entry was only one sentence. "Tonight, everything changes." The following day, "The problem is gone." The next entry, "Nobody will ever find the notebook." Those words confirm Harold Kane knew about Rebecca's research, but they created another mystery. Because if Kane knew about the notebook, where was the notebook before investigators found it? Rebecca had hidden it somewhere. She had created a backup, a way to preserve the truth, and someone had spent decades searching for it. Investigators examined Kane's journal more closely. Several pages were missing, removed carefully, not torn, not destroyed, taken. The missing pages became the next priority, because investigators believed those pages contained the location of another hidden piece of evidence, a piece Rebecca left behind, something she believed would eventually expose everyone involved. The search led detectives back to Red Hollow High School, specifically the old science laboratory, the room where Rebecca spent so many hours before she disappeared. The building had been renovated several times, but investigators discovered old architectural records, a hidden storage area behind the original laboratory wall, a place nobody had checked. Inside that space, covered by decades of dust, they found a small metal container. Inside were photographs, copies of documents, and one final letter written by Rebecca. The letter was not addressed to her family. It was addressed to whoever found it. The first line read, "If you are reading this, then they failed to erase everything." The investigators continued reading, and with every sentence, the truth became darker. Rebecca had known she was being watched. She had known someone inside the police department was involved. She had known her life was in danger, but she had also known something else. Something that explained why she went to meet Mark Ellison that night. She believed he was ready to confess. She believed he wanted to expose the entire operation. But Rebecca had made one mistake. She believed guilt would overcome fear. She believed a person could choose the truth after spending years protecting a lie. She was wrong. The final sentence of Rebecca's letter left investigators shaken. The person who finds this must understand one thing. The people involved are not afraid of prison. They are afraid of being forgotten. For 38 years, they believed they had succeeded. But now their names were written in evidence files. Their secrets were exposed. And the final question remained. What exactly happened inside Rebecca's car that night? Because the evidence now showed Mark Ellison was there. Harold Cain was connected. Thomas Voss gave the orders. But someone had still been hiding one final piece of the truth. And investigators were about to discover that Rebecca's last moments were even more complicated than anyone imagined. The discovery of Rebecca Hayes' final letter changed the way investigators viewed the entire case. For years, everyone believed Rebecca disappeared because she discovered something dangerous. That part was true. But the letter revealed something investigators had never understood. Rebecca knew she was being watched. She knew someone was following her investigation. And yet she continued. Not because she was careless. Not because she underestimated the danger. But because she believed the truth was worth the risk. Detective Lauren Mitchell read the letter several times. One sentence stayed with her. They're afraid of being forgotten. It explained everything. The people responsible had spent decades trying to erase a crime. They destroyed records, manipulated investigations, silenced witnesses. But they never understood one thing. Every secret leaves something behind. A document. A memory. A person who remembers. Rebecca had become that person. And now, 38 years later, her final message was bringing everything back into the light. Investigators returned to the question that remained unanswered. What happened inside Rebecca's vehicle after the recording ended? The recovered cassette proved there was a confrontation. The DNA proved Mark Ellison was inside the car. The notebook proved Rebecca had discovered the conspiracy. But the exact sequence of events was still unclear. Then forensic investigators made another discovery. Hidden beneath the original audio recording was a second layer of sound. A background noise almost impossible to hear. A repeated clicking sound. At first, analysts believed it was damage from the old cassette. But after enhancement, they identified it. A turn signal. Rebecca's vehicle had been moving. The conversation was not happening while the car was parked. It happened while someone was driving. This changed the entire timeline. Rebecca was not attacked at the service road. She had been taken there. Investigators reconstructed the final moments. Rebecca left Red Hollow High School after receiving the phone call. She entered her vehicle. Someone she trusted got inside. They drove toward Miller Quarry. The person convinced her they were going to reveal the truth. But somewhere along the way, the situation changed. Investigators believed Mark Ellison confronted Rebecca about the evidence she had collected. He demanded the notebook. She refused. The argument escalated. But then another vehicle arrived. Harold Cain. The second person heard on the recording. The two men realized Rebecca had documented everything. They knew she had created copies. They knew she had protected herself. And they understood that simply taking a notebook would not be enough. Rebecca had prepared for exactly what happened. She had expected someone to try to silence her. The investigators now had a new theory. Rebecca had hidden evidence before meeting Ellison. She had left a trail that eventually led investigators back to the truth. But there was still one mystery. Why did Mark Ellison keep the evidence for so many years? Why keep the notebook? Why keep the cassette? Why risk discovery? The answer came from a psychological evaluation conducted after his arrest. Investigators believed Ellison did not keep the evidence because he was careless. He kept it because he believed he was untouchable. For decades, he watched the investigation fail. He watched Rebecca's family wait. He watched detectives search the wrong places. Every unanswered question reinforced his belief that he had won. The evidence was not a mistake. It was a trophy, a reminder that he had controlled the truth. But time changed everything. The same technology that solved other cold cases eventually reached Rebecca's. The same evidence Ellison thought was useless became the reason he was arrested. The DNA he never feared became the evidence that exposed him. The trial began 9 months later. The courtroom was packed. Rebecca's family sat in the front row. For the first time in decades, they heard the full story. The prosecution presented the timeline, the notebook, the financial records, the recordings, the DNA evidence, the hidden files. The jury heard how a respected officer manipulated an investigation to protect a network of corruption. They heard how Rebecca Hayes was not a random victim. She was a person who found the truth, and someone decided she could not be allowed to share it. Mark Ellison remained silent throughout most of the trial. He avoided looking at Rebecca's family. But during the final day of testimony, he made one unexpected statement. He asked to speak. The courtroom became silent. The judge allowed it. Ellison stood slowly. For a moment, he looked like the same officer people remembered from 1987. Older, weaker, but still carrying the confidence that had protected him for decades. Then he spoke. I thought time would bury it. Nobody moved. He continued. I thought people would stop asking. Rebecca's brother stared at him. You knew we were waiting. Ellison looked down. I knew. Those 2 words carried more weight than any confession, because they confirmed what the family had always feared. He knew. He knew they were searching. He knew they were suffering. And he chose silence. The jury reached a verdict after less than 6 hours. Guilty. The announcement spread across Texas. After 38 years, the mystery of Rebecca Hayes had finally been answered. But the case was not remembered only because of the arrest. It was remembered because of what Rebecca left behind. Her courage, her determination, her refusal to ignore what she discovered. After the trial, the old Red Hollow High School science room was transformed into a memorial. A small plaque was placed near the entrance. It read, "Truth survives those who try to hide it." Students walked past it every day. Many knew the story. Many did not. But every year, new students learned about Rebecca Hayes, the teacher who searched for answers, the woman who uncovered a secret, the person who proved that one voice can outlast decades of silence. Yet even after conviction, Detective Laura Mitchell kept one final copy of the case file, not because she doubted the verdict, not because she believed the wrong person was convicted, but because cold cases teach investigators one important lesson. A solved case is not the end of the story. It is the moment the truth finally begins to breathe. And in the final pages of Rebecca Hayes' file, investigators added one sentence, a sentence that would remain there forever. After 38 years, Rebecca Hayes was finally heard. The conviction of Mark Ellison closed the courtroom chapter of the Rebecca Hayes investigation. But outside the courthouse walls, the consequences continued spreading, because the truth about what happened in Red Hollow was larger than one man. For decades, the town had believed Rebecca disappeared because of a personal tragedy, a wrong place, a wrong time, a random act of violence. But the evidence revealed something far more disturbing. Rebecca Hayes was not lost. She was erased. Someone had attempted to remove her from history, to make her name become just another forgotten headline, another unsolved case number, another file collecting dust in an evidence room. But Rebecca had left behind something more powerful than fear. She left evidence. And evidence has a way of surviving. After the trial, investigators continued reviewing every remaining document connected to conspiracy. The goal was no longer just prosecution. It was understanding. How had so many people kept the secret alive for so long? How had a group of individuals managed to hide the truth for nearly 4 decades? The answer was found in the smallest details. A missing report, a delayed interview, a forgotten financial record, a witness who changed their story. Piece by piece, investigators rebuilt the machinery that protected the crime, and they discovered something shocking. The cover-up was not created overnight. It was built slowly, over years. One favor, one payment, one decision at a time. Mark Ellison had not become corrupt in a single moment. He had crossed small lines until eventually there were no lines left. The first confirmed connection between Ellison and Thomas Voss appeared in 1979, 2 years before Walter Pierce disappeared. At the time, Ellison was still a young officer trying to build his career. Voss was already a powerful businessman. According to investigators, Voss recognized something in Ellison: ambition, a desire for influence, a willingness to protect people with power. That relationship became the foundation of everything that followed. When Walter Pierce discovered the financial operation, Voss needed someone inside law enforcement, someone who could redirect attention, someone who could control evidence. Ellison became that person. Then, years later, Rebecca Hayes unknowingly stepped into the same path. She followed Pierce's investigation. She found the same names. She asked the same questions. And the people who silenced Pierce realized they had another problem. Rebecca was not just curious. She was determined. Former classmates describe her as someone who could never ignore unanswered questions, a person who would spend hours researching a small detail until she understood the entire picture. That personality trait made her an excellent teacher. It also made her dangerous to people hiding secrets, because Rebecca noticed patterns, and patterns were exactly what exposed them. Months after the trial, the Texas Cold Case Unit released additional information about the investigation. The public learned details that had remained hidden for decades, including the fact that Rebecca had created multiple copies of her research. She had stored documents in different locations. She had protected herself. Investigators discovered that she had even written instructions for what should happen if she disappeared. One note found inside her classroom read, "If something happens to me, do not assume I left. Look at who benefits." That sentence became one of the most important pieces of the entire case, because it showed Rebecca understood the danger. She knew someone might try to make her disappearance look voluntary. She knew someone might attempt to destroy her reputation. But she believed the truth would eventually survive. And she was right. The investigation also brought unexpected closure to Walter Pierce's family. For decades, they had lived with the same unanswered questions. Why did Walter disappear? Who was responsible? Why did nobody investigate further? After the Hayes trial, investigators officially reopened Pierce's case. The evidence was overwhelming. Although many individuals involved were deceased, the official record was changed. Walter Pierce was no longer listed as a missing person. His death was reclassified as a homicide, a final acknowledgement that his disappearance had never been an accident. It had been part of something larger. The discovery brought emotional closure to his surviving relatives. But it also raised another painful realization. How many other people had been ignored? How many families had waited because someone powerful decided the truth was inconvenient? That question stayed with Detective Lauren Mitchell. She began reviewing other cold cases from the same period, not because she believed every case was connected, but because Rebecca's investigation revealed a dangerous possibility. Sometimes the reason a case remains unsolved is not because the evidence disappears. Sometimes it is because someone makes sure nobody follows it. Years later, Mitchell would describe a Rebecca Hayes case as the investigation that changed her career, not because of the arrest, not because of the media attention, but because of what Rebecca represented. She was never just a victim, Mitchell said. She was an investigator before we were. The statement became widely repeated because it captured the strange reality of the case. The person who solved the mystery was the person who was killed by it. Rebecca collected evidence. Rebecca followed leads. Rebecca connected names. The police only finished what she started. Back in Red Hollow, life slowly returned to normal. The news crews left. The courthouse became quiet. The old service road near Miller Quarry became just another stretch of pavement. But people who lived there never looked at it the same way again. They remembered the years of questions, the rumors, the uncertainty, and finally, the answer. Every October, on the anniversary of Rebecca's disappearance, former students gathered outside the old high school. They placed flowers near the memorial plaque. They shared stories, not about the crime, about Rebecca, the teacher, the friend, the person who believed every mystery had a solution. The final chapter of the case was officially archived 39 years after her disappearance. The cover page contained a photograph of Rebecca smiling outside her classroom. Underneath it were the words, "Case solved." But Detective Mitchell added a handwritten note beneath the official conclusion, a personal reminder. One sentence. The truth was never gone. It was waiting. And that became the legacy of the Texas 1987 cold case. A reminder that time can slow justice. It can delay answers. It can bury evidence beneath decades of silence. But it cannot destroy the truth forever. Because somewhere, hidden inside forgotten files, old recordings, and memories people thought no longer mattered, the truth is still waiting to be found. The final chapter of the Rebecca Hayes investigation did not begin with an arrest. It began with a question that remained long after the courtroom emptied, after the cameras disappeared, after the headlines faded. The question was not who killed Rebecca Hayes. That answer had finally been discovered. The question was, how many years of her life had been stolen from the people who loved her because someone believed the truth could be controlled? For 38 years, Rebecca's family lived in a space between hope and grief, a place where every phone call could bring answers. Every knock on the door could change everything. Every unknown face in a crowd could be the person who knew what happened. Her mother kept Rebecca's bedroom untouched. The books remained on the shelf. The photographs remained on the wall. The small details of an ordinary life became reminders of an extraordinary loss. For years, family members wondered if they would ever know the truth. They wondered if Rebecca's name would disappear into history. But it never did, because some stories refused to disappear. And Rebecca Hayes became one of them. After the trial ended, Detective Laura Mitchell visited the Hayes family one final time. She brought a folder. Inside were copies of the evidence, the notebook pages, the final letter, the documents that proved Rebecca's work had mattered. She placed the folder on the table. This belonged to her, Mitchell said. She found the truth before anyone else. Rebecca's brother opened the notebook slowly. He ran his fingers across the handwriting. The same handwriting he remembered from childhood. The same handwriting that had filled birthday cards, school notes, family letters. Now those same words had become the evidence that solved one of Texas's longest cold cases. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then he said quietly, "She knew someone would try to erase this." And he was right, but they failed. The story of Rebecca Hayes spread far beyond Red Hollow. Documentaries were produced. Investigators from other states studied the case. Law enforcement agencies used it as an example of why old evidence should never be ignored, because the breakthrough did not come from a new crime. It came from looking again at an old one, the DNA sample, the forgotten cassette tape, the hidden notebook, the documents nobody thought mattered. Every piece had been waiting. The case also changed the way Texas handled cold investigations. Evidence storage procedures were reviewed. Old files were digitized. Thousands of forgotten cases were examined again. Not every investigation ended with an arrest. Not every family received the answer they wanted. But Rebecca's case proved something important. A cold case is not a dead case. It is simply a case waiting for the right moment. Years after conviction, the old Miller Quarry area was almost unrecognizable. The roads had changed. The buildings were gone. Nature had taken back much of the land. But one small memorial stood near the entrance. A simple stone. No dramatic words. No accusations. Only a name. Rebecca Hayes. People who visited often expected to feel fear. Instead, many described something different. Peace. because the place that once represented silence had become a symbol of truth, a reminder that even the darkest secrets eventually face the light. Detective Mitchell retired several years later. On her final day, she cleaned out her office. Most files were transferred. Most notes were archived. But one item stayed with her. A copy of Rebecca's final letter. She kept it framed on the wall of her home, not as a reminder of the crime, as a reminder of courage. The final sentence of Rebecca's letter remained the most powerful. If you are reading this, then they failed to erase everything. Those words became the meaning of the entire investigation, because they did fail. They failed to erase Rebecca. They failed to erase Walter Pierce. They failed to erase the evidence. They failed to erase the truth. The people responsible believed decades would protect them. They believed memories would fade. They believed old files would remain closed forever. But they misunderstood one thing. Time does not always bury secrets. Sometimes time preserves them, waiting for someone willing to search again, waiting for someone willing to ask one more question, waiting for someone willing to open one more box. The Texas 1987 cold case became a story not just about murder. It became a story about persistence, about the people who refused to forget, about investigators who returned to a case everyone believed was finished, about a woman who continued speaking even after she was gone. Rebecca Hayes disappeared in October 1987, but her voice survived. Through her notes, through her evidence, through the truth she left behind. And after 38 years, the final headline changed. The words that once described a mystery became words of justice. Texas 1987 cold case solved. Shocking DNA match reveals hidden killer. But for the people of Red Hollow, the headline was never the ending. The ending was simpler. A family finally received answers. A community finally understood what happened. And a woman who spent her final days searching for the truth finally received what she had fought for, to be remembered, to be heard, and to prove that no matter how long the darkness lasts, the truth always finds a way back. The official investigation was closed. The courtroom verdict was recorded. The evidence was archived. But for the people who had lived through the Rebecca Hayes case, closure was not something that happened on a single day. Closure came slowly, in small moments, in quiet mornings, in the realization that after decades of unanswered questions, there was finally a place to put the pain. For Rebecca's family, the hardest part was accepting that justice and happiness were not the same thing. The conviction did not bring Rebecca back. The verdict did not erase 38 years of waiting. The courtroom could declare the truth, but it could not return the years that were stolen, years of birthdays without her, holidays without her, family photographs with an empty space where she should have been standing. That was the reality of every cold case. The investigation could end, but the impact continued. Rebecca's brother often visited the memorial outside the old high school. He would stand there alone, sometimes for only a few minutes, sometimes for hours. He never brought flowers. He said Rebecca never cared much about flowers. Instead, he brought books, science books, history books, books about mysteries, because that was who Rebecca was, a person who searched, a person who questioned, a person who believed every unanswered question deserved attention. Years before investigators reopened the case, before the DNA match, before the arrest, Rebecca had already done the most important work. She refused to ignore what did not make sense. She noticed the details everyone else overlooked, and those details eventually destroyed a 38-year-old lie. The legacy of the case reached beyond Red Hollow. Across Texas, families with unresolved cases began contacting investigators. They asked one question: could our case be looked at again? For some families, the answer brought new hope. For others, it brought painful reminders. Not every mystery had a hidden notebook. Not every cold case had a forgotten DNA sample. Not every disappearance had a final answer waiting. But Rebecca's story changed the way people viewed those cases. They were no longer just old files. They were people. People with names. People with families. People whose stories deserved to be remembered. Detective Lauren Mitchell continued receiving letters years after the trial. Some came from investigators. Some came from families. Some came from strangers who had followed the case through the media. One letter came from a retired police officer who admitted something difficult. He wrote that during his career, he had seen cold cases pushed aside, not because nobody cared, but because there was always another emergency, another investigation, another priority. He said Rebecca's case reminded him that forgotten cases were not forgotten by the people who loved the victims. That sentence stayed with Mitchell because it explained why cold cases mattered. The passage of time did not reduce the importance of what happened. It only increased the responsibility to find answers. Meanwhile, the remaining financial records connected to Thomas Voss continued to reveal information. Investigators discovered additional business relationships, more hidden payments, more examples of how influence had been used to protect certain people. The operation was larger than anyone originally understood, but the people who built it made one critical mistake. They believed protecting the secret was the same as destroying the evidence. It was not. Every person involved left something behind: a signature, a payment, a conversation, a memory, a mistake, and eventually those pieces connected. The investigators who worked the final stages of the case often described it as putting together a puzzle found decades after it was broken apart. At first, the pieces looked unrelated: a missing teacher, a disappeared businessman, a corrupt officer, a forgotten financial record, a hidden notebook. But when placed together, they created a picture nobody could deny. The truth had been there all along. It had simply been buried beneath layers of silence. Years after Mark Ellison's conviction, a young detective assigned to the cold case unit visited the original evidence archive. He opened the old Rebecca Hayes file, the same file that had once represented failure. Now it represented something different: hope. Inside the front cover, he found a handwritten note from Detective Mitchell. It was not an official report, just a personal reminder. It read, "Never assume a closed door means there is nothing behind it." The young detective kept that note, not because of the words alone, because of the story behind them. A woman disappeared. A community waited. A case went cold. But someone eventually opened the door again, and behind it was the truth. The story of Rebecca Hayes was never only about the person responsible. It was about the people who refused to stop looking, the investigators who returned to old evidence, the witnesses who finally spoke, the family who continued saying her name, and Rebecca herself, a teacher who never wore a badge, never carried a weapon, never had official authority, but who investigated a mystery more carefully than anyone before her. She followed the evidence. She documented what she found. She prepared for the possibility that someone would try to silence her. And because she did, the truth survived. On the anniversary of her disappearance, Red Hollow held a small ceremony. No cameras, no reporters, just residents, former students, investigators, family members. A simple gathering to remember a person, not a crime. A former student stood before the crowd. She described Rebecca as the teacher who made ordinary things fascinating, the teacher who turned science lessons into discoveries, the teacher who told students that curiosity was not a weakness, it was a strength. Then she said something that made the crowd silent. Rebecca spent her life teaching us to look closer. In the end, she taught everyone the same lesson. She paused. Look closer to truth. The crowd remained quiet, because everyone understood. That was the reason the case was solved. Not because of luck, not because of one miracle, because someone looked closer. Someone questioned what others accepted. Someone refused to let an unanswered question disappear. And that is why the Texas 1987 cold case became more than a headline, more than an investigation, more than a courtroom story. It became a reminder that every missing person has a story. Every victim has a voice. Every forgotten file still represents someone waiting for someone to care, waiting for someone to search, Waiting for someone to ask the question, that changes everything. What if the answer was there all along? Because sometimes the smallest clue can break the strongest lie. Sometimes one forgotten piece of evidence can expose decades of deception. And sometimes the person who was silenced becomes the reason the truth finally speaks. Years after conviction of Mark Ellison, the Rebecca Hayes investigation continued to exist in a place between history and memory. The official paperwork was complete. The signatures were collected. The evidence boxes were sealed. But the story itself never truly ended. Because some cases are not remembered because of the crime. They are remembered because of what they reveal about people, about fear, about courage, about the long distance between what happened and when the world finally admits it happened. The Rebecca Hayes case became one of those stories. A case that showed how easily the truth could disappear when the wrong people controlled the information, and how powerful the truth could become when even one person refused to let it die. Inside the Texas Cold Case archives, Rebecca's file became one of the most requested investigations for training purposes. New detectives studied the timeline. They examined the mistakes. They analyzed the breakthroughs. But more than anything, they studied the warning signs. They ignored details, the unanswered questions, the assumptions that shaped the original investigation. Because the biggest lesson from the case was not about technology. It was about perspective. In 1987, investigators had evidence. They had witnesses. They had opportunities. What they lacked was the ability to see the entire picture. The investigation became trapped inside a single idea, that Rebecca's disappearance had to be connected to her personal life. Every piece of evidence was forced to fit that theory. And when something did not fit, it was ignored. That mistake allowed decades to pass. But decades also created something unexpected. Distance. The people who hid the truth became comfortable. They believed they had survived the dangerous years. They believed witnesses would forget. They believed records would disappear. They believed Rebecca's name would become only a photograph in an old newspaper. But they misunderstood the nature of cold cases. Time does not always weaken a case. Sometimes it strengthens it. Because people make mistakes when they think they have won. They stop protecting themselves. They stop hiding every detail. They forget the small things. A forgotten payment. A saved document. A recorded conversation. A notebook hidden behind a wall. The very things they ignored became the things that destroyed them. After the trial, investigators continued examining the final days of Rebecca's life. Not because they questioned the verdict, but because Rebecca deserved to have every moment understood. They reconstructed her final week, her conversations, her movements, her research, her fears. They discovered that even when Rebecca realized she was in danger, she continued working. She continued documenting. She continued collecting evidence. The investigators found notes showing that Rebecca had considered walking away. She had written, "Maybe some truths are not worth finding." But beneath that sentence, written later, was another. If nobody finds them, they continue hurting people. That sentence became the perfect description of Rebecca Hayes. She was not searching for attention. She was not searching for fame. She was searching because she believed someone had to, and that belief ultimately cost her everything. But it also gave her something no one could take away. A legacy. The science students who once sat in her classroom became adults. Many became teachers themselves. Some became researchers. Some entered law enforcement. Several said Rebecca influenced their lives long after they left Red Hollow. They remembered the small things, the way she encouraged questions, the way she treated every student like their ideas mattered, the way she would stop in the middle of the lesson because she had discovered something interesting and wanted everyone else to see it. That curiosity became the strongest connection between the woman she was and the investigation she left behind. Rebecca investigated because she was curious. She searched because she wanted to understand. She refused to accept simple answers. And eventually, that same curiosity solved the mystery surrounding her own disappearance. Years later, a documentary crew asked Detective Lauren Mitchell what she believed was the most important evidence in the case. Most expected her to mention the DNA match, the notebook, the confession recording. But Mitchell gave a different answer. The most important evidence was Rebecca herself. The interviewer asked what she meant. Mitchell explained, "People think cold cases are solved by objects. They are not. They are solved because someone cares enough to understand the person behind those objects." That became the final lesson of the investigation. Rebecca was never just a victim in a file. She was a person with dreams, a person with plans, a person who mattered. And remembering that changed everything. The old service road near Miller Quarry eventually became part of a county preservation project. The area was cleaned. The abandoned structures were removed. A small sign was placed nearby, not describing the crime, not describing the investigation, only describing Rebecca, her profession, her passion, her impact. The final line on the sign read, "She searched for answers. The world searched for her." Visitors often stopped there. Some knew the story. Some did not. But everyone understood the meaning. A place once connected with disappearance had become connected with remembrance. The darkness attached to it had been replaced by something else. Respect. The final evidence report in the case file contained a simple conclusion: cause resolved, responsible parties identified, investigation closed. But beneath the official language was another handwritten note added years later by an investigator. It said, "A case may close. A story never does." Because the story of Rebecca Hayes was not just about a crime from 1987. It was about every family waiting for answers, every detective reopening an old file, every piece of evidence sitting quietly in storage, every forgotten name hoping someone will look again. The world often thinks time creates distance, but in some cases, time creates a path leading back to the truth. 38 years after Rebecca disappeared, the question that haunted Red Hollow finally had an answer. Who took Rebecca Hayes? The answer was painful. The answer was shocking. The answer changed everything. But the final message of the case was not about the person responsible. It was about the person who refused to disappear. Rebecca Hayes, the teacher, the investigator, the woman whose final work exposed a secret that powerful people spent decades protecting. And in the end, the truth she fought for survived longer than the people who tried to bury it. Because secrets can hide, evidence can be forgotten, investigations can fail. But one thing remains true: the truth waits. And sometimes, after years of silence, it finds its way home.